Welcome back, everyone. Season 2, Episode 2 of What's Spinnin'. You're joined here by your regular host, Brett Kelly, Mitch Hall. I wanted to say Mitch.
Man. I don't know about you, but I was starting to feel like an actual real podcaster, but we just kind of went down a little bit, I guess.
All right, as long as we're riffing, right?
All right, yeah.
Anyway, with that out of the way, let's talk about why we're here this week.
Yeah,
we are joined by one of my favorite guests we've had yet.
Mm-hmm.
We've worked with this man for quite a
Many
few
years.
years.
Yep.
This week on What's Spinnin', we are joined by Alan Nagl. Alan has 40 years of experience in the hard drive industry, extended assignments in R&D, engineering, manufacturing, reliability, as well as system integration, testing, and troubleshooting. Alan has seen a lot of things.
Yep.
We are lucky today to be joined by Alan, mainly because, speaking as an engineer here, everything moves so fast. And when you get to talk to someone who's been in the game for as long as this and has the experience and have seen the things they've seen, they've got a lot of insight.
A lot of wisdom.
A lot of wisdom, a lot of things to share.
And also, I mean, for some of our listeners who are kind of geeks and like the insider baseball, this will be a great podcast for you if you really want to hear some cool stuff about hard drives.
Anyway, I'll cut it off there and bring the man in. Alan, thank you so much for joining us this week.
You bet, Brett. Good to see you guys, Mitch.
Absolutely.
Thanks
Happy to have
for having
you.
me on. It's wonderful.
Yes.
So you want me to do a little introduction of who I am?
Yeah,
that would be great.
Exactly. Let's talk about what you've done, kind of your past positions and where you are now.
Okay, sure. So I got started in the hard drive industry quite early. I was age 19. It was in 1979, and I originally worked for Ball Aerospace parent company, Ball Computer Products, and we were working on a 14-inch diameter disk, and the device it looked a lot like a photocopier. It was, big and square. And when you opened up the lid, there was a big disk pack in there with a handle on top. And you loaded 4 of these great big red oxide disks and you got a whopping 5 megabytes out. So that's how old I am. That's how far back I go. After working there, I joined a company called Miniscribe. Miniscribe was actually one of the pioneers, along with Seagate, into the 5 1/4 inch disk drive space. They started making those so they could enable the IBM PC, and that's kind of where the PC started going originally, was with those 5 1/4 inch. I was with Miniscribe for about 9 years. I went from being an assembler to an engineering technician to a senior engineering technician, and I was right on the cusp of managing the lab when HDSTOR took them over. So a little bit after that, I went and worked for a subsidiary of Fujitsu, and we developed a 2.5 inch drive, one of the first ramp load experiences that I had. And we took that drive all the way to volume manufacture in Yamagata, Japan. I spent about 7 months over there as an expat, training people and writing detailed manufacturing instructions. So I got some very good manufacturing engineering experience out of that job. After that, when I came back from Japan and that group dissolved, I joined Connor Peripherals in 1992. And this is where things really started to mature. At that point, I was about 32 years old, and I was working with some people I knew from the Miniscribe job, and I really got an incredible opportunity at that point. It was only about 2 years into that Connor Peripherals that there was a merger with Seagate, and so I became a Seagate employee at that point.
Wow, that's
and the design center that I worked in here in Longmont, Colorado, just exploded. We built a new building. It was completely customized for this purpose of developing hard drives. We actually had a real live clean room rather than just flow benches. And we developed a real top end, really high end reliability test process. And at that point in time, I was working as an engineering manager in research and development engineering. I was running the engineering validation test lab. So that would be things like shock and vibe and power consumption, acoustics, performance, that kind of stuff, right? And so I was really getting to the point where I kind of understood all the drives. While I'm doing that testing in that EVT lab, the engineers who are doing all of the detail design in all the layers of technology would be coming in and asking me to take certain data. And they would explain to me what data they want and why they want that specific data. So even though I wasn't a servo engineer, I was learning a lot about servo.
Right.
Even though I wasn't a ASIC engineer, I was learning a lot about PCB layout and how to get certain signals out of the drive. And so it just started adding up and adding up. So then in 1999, a gentleman who was charged with building a large-scale design maturity testing DMT facility, along with a reliability demonstration testing lab, that'd be an RDT lab, that guy recruited me over. And he had a vision of trying to get hard drives to be something other than just a computer peripheral. Everybody knows that's how it started, but that's the point in time when TiVo popped up and started to try to use a drive to store something other than just binary data, computer files, right? And so that's why he recruited me, and he put me into a position that made me who I am today in terms of overall hard drive knowledge. So we called it Design Services Center, DSC for short. And basically I was in charge of about 6 different laboratories and a group of folks that did the testing there. So the whole idea was we would bring a customer in who had any kind of an issue, complaint, or a new opportunity for drives. They want to do something different. We would bring them in and welcome them into the design center. They would come into my labs. I would stand right with them as we had their device go through all the different tests. And I would explain to them how each test was done, what it is we're looking for. We would use specially instrumented engineering level drives so we could get data out of that drive that this customer could never get. But we let them watch and we explained to them what the drive was telling us. And boy, oh boy, did that turn out to be a powerful tool. Just a quick story to tell you how powerful the tool is.
Yeah.
We eventually helped to develop the serial ATA streaming command set. Now, almost nobody uses those anymore, but those got developed based on what we learned in the DSC functionality, because we looked at the data going onto the drive and off the drive, and we realized there was an opportunity for the caching to be modified. So we had some experimental code made, and we found that made the drive much more happy, and it made it able to follow the host and kind of get in line step by step. You could think of it as a more streamlined serial recording and sequential recording, as opposed to anything that was random. Up to that point, we hadn't really seen much of that. So that's the basis of what I was doing that got us able to make different kinds of drives. So why do we have NAS drives? Well, because it's different than a server. Why do we have the Skyhawk and Skyhawk AI security recording? Because the camera's pumping in data is much different than a PC saving little Susie's homework. So there are actually a lot of details that were learned during this time frame. Now, it's true that WD had something similar, and they were doing their parts, and they were creating some abilities and some techniques at this time. But I'm pretty sure I was the first guy who was doing all the different kinds of tests with outside personnel at the system level, not the drive level. So anyway, that turned into a great thing for both Seagate and the customers, because I could go back then to the core teams that were developing the next drives, and I could explain what I learned. And the customer could go back to their house and say, okay, these drives work a little different than we thought. Here's what I learned. And everything started getting better from that point on.
I just gotta make sure clarification here. When you said TiVo, you mean like literally TiVo as in like the TV recording software? Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, my DVR at home still has a platter in there, HD that records stuff. Oh, that's very cool. Yeah, I guess I didn't think of that, right? And it's funny when you say that. Like I think about back in the day when laptops used to all have 2.5-inch hard drives, right, spinners. And it's funny, like 3-4 years go by and those things just start to go to a crawl, right? And you think about all of the movement and the gyrations and the vibrations that like a 2.5-inch would get in a laptop. And it's like, just a friend of mine reached out the other day. She's like, my laptop's so slow, and I found out it was a 2.5-inch HD. So like immediately replacing that just made it a whole new laptop for her. So it's really cool that you did all that kind of work for different use cases.
Yeah, we learned a lot of amazing things, and a bunch of different features came out of that. And you talk about the laptop. A lot of the reason the laptops get slowed down is because of fragmentation. Right?
Yeah,
the memory gets full, the disk gets fragmented over time, and then it's struggling to cache in the background, especially if your disk is getting very full, right? So
yeah, of course.
I can remember back in the old days working, in labs, we would actually test the performance of each individual drive before we would use it in any kind of test to make sure the drive is healthy and happy. And sometimes we would be using a drive we'd used before, and the first thing we would do is defrag it, and then we would go do a hard reboot, and poof, its performance in certain ways would kind of pop back up and be fresh again.
Yep, all those delete cycles and rewrites definitely start to add up over time in any OS, really.
Yeah, and more so in the TiVo space than in the laptop or the compute space, right?
Cool.
Yep.
So that's so cool that your kind of growth in your engineering world has been so closely tied with storage media, known as the hard drive guy. But there's so much more than that. I know you've got opinions on flash as well too. So why don't you tell us where you're at now? You're not with Seagate anymore. You're with HDSTOR.
Yeah, that's correct. So I currently work for a value add custom distributor. We work only in North America. We work only with OEMs and integrators. And we specialize in hard drives and SSDs. That's all we sell. We don't sell anything other than these storage peripherals. We have a wide array of stuff available that we can work with our customers on. But fundamentally, what I do today is I am a liaison to Seagate. We're a Seagate house. I'm a liaison, so I'm getting insider information on drives that are being developed and when they're going to be released. So I have a really good, you can imagine after 17 years in Seagate, I have quite a few contacts. But I also have some, there's just a few. But I also have some specific contacts that I'm supposed to use for certain questions. And because this is my job 24/7, I don't do anything else, I can typically get answers from Seagate or cooperation from Seagate a little faster than the field salespeople can. They have a much harder job with so many more customers. I am dealing, of course, just with HDSTOR customers. But the beautiful part about it is HDSTOR is a customer to Seagate. And so the people who help me want to help me because we buy a lot of hard drives, right? We're on that list of higher end customers to them. But we end up becoming the drive supplier to our customers. So I've got that liaison in the middle kind of position where I can tell you things that the Seagate salespeople might not be comfortable telling you, right? Because I'm independent, but I'm still kind of an insider on the industry. Now, as far as where my head is around peripherals, so yeah, there are a couple things that I'd just like to say about myself before we move into the hard drive technical stuff. First of which is, I don't have any problem at all with NAND flash or SSDs. It's a great technology and it has its place. I myself use it in quite a few places. So this isn't a competition between hard drives and things that are trying to encroach upon hard drives. As far as I'm concerned, they're both great technologies. They're both still moving forward, and I don't see that changing anytime in the future. And I actually share Seagate's vision that SSDs and hard drives are not necessarily direct competitors. They can be teammates. They can actually provide an assistance to each other and make a stronger system in the end. So
That we do that every day. That's literally one of the big name of the game for my position as an architect, right? Is that same thing that we say very often is a little bit of flash can go a long way paired with your hard drives, right? If you do it the right way.
It's funny how the world thinks very black and white. New technology, it will destroy all other technology.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know. There's a place for both.
There's a place for both.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, it is. It's not that simple.
It never is.
Nope. But what really we're excited to talk about, and we had you here for the Creator Summit. I keep forgetting when that was because time is so crazy for me. August. Yeah. So that was really cool, and being able to get to hear you talk about hard drives and the technologies and HAMR, it's really exciting. So we've got some really cool questions around that space for you, and I don't know what the first one maybe.
Well, I'll dive into that, and
sure.
I do want to preamble with this too, because Alan knows as we talk about this, we love storage media of all types.
Yep.
But I do feel that hard drives don't necessarily get the love
that
they deserve.
Yep.
They are seen as a black box that stores stuff, but the amount of mechanical precision
and engineering
and reliability and everything that Alan talked about there is so impressive that you forget about it because you take it for granted. Things become commoditized. Oh, there's new flash media. That's all the exciting stuff.
Yep.
But there's no one better in this world to explain the amazement.
Yeah, the nuances
than Alan. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through a
series of questions
and break it down. So Alan, you know hard drives. We know hard drives, not as well, but we know we're not afraid of them. We've been around them. Safe to say most of our listeners know them too.
Yep.
A matter of fact, we kind of named our podcast after that.
Yeah,
What's Spinnin?
What's Spinnin?
Yeah. But what I wanted to ask of you is, for those people who really do treat them like the black box, you take that lid off. Like, what's going on underneath? Like, how is a hard drive functioning? What's it doing? How does it storing your stuff?
Yep.
And sprinkle in some of that amazement that you're so good at sharing of how impressive these things are.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. So it's a good idea to talk a little bit about the basics of what's going on inside a hard drive before we get too carried away into some of the details and newer technology. So I got a little 2.5-inch clear cover drive here to kind of remind you. So the first thing is it's still a hard drive. Even when we get into the atomic level kind of engineering that's going on today, the basics are still the same. Mm-hmm. You've got a disk, it's rigid, and it rotates. It's sitting on a spindle, and it's going roundy forever. We've got to have it going round and round for two reasons. There's a mechanical reason, which is it's got to pull the gases inside there and create flow. If we don't have flow, we can't fly the head. So the disk spinning is not just about the magnetics between the head and the disk, it's also a mechanical requirement. Okay, so then the next thing is we've got the voice coil motor, which we'll commonly refer to as the actuator assembly. So that is over there. And this is got a pivot cartridge in there that allows the arms of the actuator to go to the right and to the left. Okay, and that takes your head and lets it go from the outer diameter to the inner diameter, accessing all the different tracks of recorded stuff in there. Now that actuator assembly, or the voice coil motor / actuator assembly is extremely complex, and it has to be balanced, for example, from the nose to the tail, the nose being the recording heads, and on the other side of the pivot, the tail being the coil that rides between the magnets so that they've got a field to react to and actuate those heads back and forth. It's got to be balanced from head to toe. Now, why would that be? Well, if we were to give it x-axis vibration, which would be this direction, if that actuator weren't completely balanced, that linear motion would cause a torque. And that would actually take us off track. So we've got to try to fight that the best we can. And we're going to do that by using the servo positioning system. We're going to give the servo positioning system a little bit of an advantage by having that actuator be fully balanced. Okay, then we got the ramp load. That's how we get the heads off the media. You know, for 35 years, the heads landed on the media. Not just any old place. There was a dedicated landing zone at the inner diameter right next to the disk hub. But yeah, it was called a contact start stop drive. If you go back and look at a specification for an old drive from the 80s through the 90s maybe, you would see that they specified CSS cycles, and that's what they're talking about, is actually land in that head, contact, start, stop. Now, that was a liability for drives because it's hard to keep it clean if you're going to let those two slide on each other, right?
Yep.
And there were a lot of other learning processes we had to go through and inventions we had to create to get rid of some of those liabilities and get that drive moving forward in terms of cleanliness and therefore longevity and therefore reliability. So that's it, right? Let's not forget we've got a PCB on the back. The PCB is going to have the ASICs, or application-specific integrated circuits, that are required for a hard drive to work. You got to have a preamplifier out there to preamplify the stuff that's coming off the head. You have to have an encode and decode chip. I don't know if people know this yet, but it's true. Every single drive completely encrypts the data before it writes it. Did you know that?
Interesting.
When you order an SED, secure encrypted drive, they just toggle software. And that tells the host, hey, I'm an encrypted drive, give me a handshake and we'll always be friends. If you don't give me a handshake, I'm just going to keep the data encrypted. But the actual, the fact of it is that encryption is happening on each and every single command that goes to any hard drive. They're all encrypted. It's just a matter of whether they're locked. Okay.
All right, okay.
Moving on, we've got the PCBA, we got the ASICs, we've got the base casting, got the top cover. We've got our spindle motor and our disc that go roundy. We got our voice coil and our heads on the arms that go backy forthy. And then we've got the dreaded layer of technology, firmware.
Yep.
You gotta have some operating, yeah. You gotta have some operating instructions or this technology never comes alive.
Hold on, I gotta go back because the encryption part interests me. So when, let's say you buy 10 drives from the same manufacturer, and you said they're encrypting with a chip on the hard drive, are they all using like the same key to encrypt with? Whereas if you have one, you're going to be able to unencrypt the data for all of them, or do they all kind of use their own individual encryption keys? How does that kind of work?
Yeah, so the way the chip is designed, it's got an encode function, and it generates a key when it enables the encryption function. Okay, and then that key through software can either be enabled and shared with the host, or it can just reside inside the chip and never do anything. It just uses it for its own purposes. That's how I understand it works. Basically, every chip is unique, so you can't decrypt. Yeah, you can't decrypt a WD drive by putting a different board on it that you have the key to.
Okay, wild. All right, sorry. Let you continue because that was interesting.
That was an interesting fact. Haven't heard that one.
Yep. Cool.
Yeah, let's check real quick.
Firmware.
Historically, why did they do that? Well, the reason that they did that was. Yeah, the reason they did that was because they needed to encode the data for two reasons. The first reason was to compress it. You can get a little bit of compression through encoding, right? So format efficiency. The other reason that they did it was by encoding it, they could actually take each sector and create a decode key and write it at the tail end of the sector.
Okay.
They needed that because by reading off the sector encoded and then reading the key to decode it, they could then compare what the key says the sector had written versus what they picked up during their read.
It's like a kind of check something. Yeah.
There you go. It turned into ECC on the fly, error code correction.
That is very cool.
But that's where the encode decode stuff started, and that's why.
Cool. Very interesting facts. Cool.
So yeah, you were talking about
what else you want to talk about?
The dreaded firmware. Yeah.
Don't say it too loud.
Yeah. Yeah, you gotta have firmware. I think one of the things that I am surprised by still to this day when customers who they fundamentally understand what a hard drive is and what it does, they don't think very deeply into the technology, and it happens once in a while where someone will say, well, I don't know if they tested this drive right because it didn't show up. It's DOA. And then we go, okay. Will it spin? Yeah, it spins. Will it come ready? Yeah, it'll come ready. Okay, but it's clicking. Oh, well, that's not the factory not testing it. That's somebody dropping it on.
Yeah, that's broken. Yeah.
That's FedEx kicking it down the road.
Yeah, that's right. The truth of the matter is, not only do all drives get tested because they have to be, but it's actually an extremely complex process. In a future episode, we're going to dig into that.
Yeah.
Nice. Very cool. All right, so that's what's going on under the hood. It's freaking really cool.
That's the basics.
Yep, basics. What do you got next?
I have a question about a specific HDD form factor, but before that, we've got Alan here who's seen almost all of them. Can you take us through a brief history of just like the size of hard drives, both its mechanical size and its digital capacity, and just the various form factors and why we ended up with 2.5 inch or why we're at 3.5 inch and what kind of legacy maybe that put on the flash storage or whatever. Fair. But really, as a primer, I want to ask you about 2.5 inch drives, but I wanted to share a little of your brief history of the hard drive and the form factors.
Yeah, because he mentioned the 5 megabyte big drum drives. Really, that's funny. It's like that's less cache than what's on, or less space than what's on my CPU cache right now, right? Like it's wild how far we've come.
Yeah, it really is. It is really wild. Every once in a while, I still kind of rub my head and go, really? 24 terabytes, huh?
Yeah,
all right.
Yeah.
So the hard drive started in 1953 at IBM, and I'm told, I saw a photo one time, I looked for it on the internet this morning, I was going to show it to you, but I didn't locate it quickly enough. But at any rate, that first disk that proved that you could magnetically write to a plated disk, I believe that thing was a 4-foot diameter. So there's a picture somewhere where somebody's standing holding the disk next to them. It was like 4 feet tall. It's pretty outrageous. 1956 is when they first productized that, and they had already shrunk it down a little bit. They got it down to a 24-inch disk. So the 24-inch disk was standardized back in those days for mainframe computers, and that's where all of the early hard drives went. And they worked on 24-inch disks for quite a while. Once they started making a little bit more progress, IBM in about 1973 innovated to a 5.25-inch disk. And they changed the nomenclature to a Winchester hard drive. A lot of people still, to this day, they ask if it's a Winchester hard drive, which is really kind of funny because what IBM was referring to at that time was there were 2 actuators. And one of them was from the IBM Model 30, and the other one was the same thing. So it was a 30. Yeah, cool. And that's where in the Winchester rifles, of course, the 30-30. So that's where they actually got the Winchester term. So anyway, funny. From 73 to about 1980, 81, you're looking at 24-inch drives and 8-inch drives. They made enough progress in areal density that they got down to an 8-inch drive. I can remember here in town there was a hard drive manufacturer called Amcodyne, and they were making 8-inchers. And of course, Storage Technology is pretty famous. They were making 24-inchers for a long time, big heavy-duty mainframe kind of computers. So then in the early 80s, we started to see dramatic innovation because of the PC. Once the IBM PC came out and floppy disks, just didn't really handle it. We wanted to go faster. We wanted to go further. So we went from the 8-inch drive down to the 5.25. Now the 5.25-inch drive is still pretty big. Oh, hang on, I got one here. Check this baby out.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
That is a prototype 5.25-inch drive. My camera doesn't like it very well. See if I can angle it a little bit. That's a 5.25-inch prototype drive. This is a 2/3 height 5.25-inch single disc, 2 heads. And I produced this and one other like it. There were only 2 of these. And Terry Johnson, the guy who started Miniscribe way back in the day, that's what this is a Miniscribe. He had us make 2 of these prototypes, and he took one of them to Comdex with him. And he was going to kind of announce that we're making big progress in the hard drive industry. We're going to get all 12 terabytes on 1 disk instead of 2 disks. We're going to go down to a 2/3 height form factor, and that's going to make the PC way less, give you a little more airflow in there because there's more room. This is going to be great. And he takes the other prototype. I had this one in the lab. He took the other prototype with him to Comdex. And the story goes, as I heard him tell the story to employees later, he checked into the hotel and he literally had this thing in his suitcase. And so he goes down to the show floor and he gets his badge on. He goes into the show floor and he's walking around. And he comes across Juggy Tandon from Tandon Industries. Okay. And Juggy Tandon is standing there with a crowd around him, and he's got a 5 1/4 inch prototype that's half high, not 2/3 high. And Terry Johnson went right up to the elevator, got his suitcase, went straight back home, never talked to a single person.
Oh, wow.
You can't do 2/3 high if Tandon is going to have a half high.
Yeah.
And so that made that made this year's secondary prototype completely useless. They told me to throw it in the trash, and so
that's how you ended up with one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a long time ago, man. That's like 1982, a long time ago. But anyway, back to the form factors. So we went from 5 1/4 inch full high to 5 1/4 inch half high, and then from 5 1/4 inch half high, went to a 3 1/2 inch full high. Now, it's probably important at this point to say that as the PC became prevalent and available in larger numbers, and there were more hard drive companies popping up, people started having conversations about standards. You can't just make a completely proprietary standard thing. There were certain considerations that were going on, and so they created some what do you call that? A team that would get together and establish standards. And so the small form factor committee began to meet in the early 1980s. Yes, and so they standardized the mounting points for the 5 1/4 inch and then the 3 1/2 inch. And to this day, the small form factor committee still meets.
Yep.
But we have moved from the 3 1/2 inch full high to a 3 1/2 inch thin. And then from there, we moved to the 2.5 inch. And of course, that was the small form factor that was based on laptops, right?
Yes, right.
Originally, that 2 1/2 inch form factor was 15 millimeters thick. And then later on, they went to the small form factor 2, which was a 7 millimeter thick. Yeah. And that to this day is still the standard. So if you go to buy a 2.5 inch cased SSD, it's going to come in 7 millimeter thick, and it'll have all the same mounting points as it would have if it were a rotating magnetic hard drive. So that's a standard. It's been around quite some time. We did go smaller. Here, hang on.
Well, we do got M.2 as well.
Oh.
He's got the tickle trunk open now. Well, everybody look out.
Yeah. Yeah. Here's a little bitty fella.
Yeah, that's a little guy.
So this is a 1.8 inch.
Okay.
And this one was a pretty interesting thing. The small form factor committee on this one, what they did is they said, well, you don't have to have screw holes. Instead, you can use little rails.
Okay.
And we can make
like a little slide carriage.
we can make a rail guided insert and automatic connection. This one was an IDE interface at the time. But at any rate, that's where they wanted to go for a while, which was a removable 1.8 inch. That way you could put your OS drive in there and you could get going. And when you're ready to save some data, you could pop it out and pop another one in. And you could, as many of them as you wanted to buy, you could put data on the shelf.
That would have been a pretty cool standard.
Yeah. So that never really got commercially viable. But they did shrink one more time, and they got all the way down to a 1 inch hard drive. So this was about 1999. We did produce a 1 inch hard drive. And the only place that those ever really ended up being used at all was in small form factor jump drives. So what you would think of as a thumb drive today, we were trying to make a 1 inch USB jump drive in about 1999, 2000. But that became defunct as well. So now, the only hard drives that are manufactured anymore are the 3.5 inch, what's now considered the full height or full size 3.5 inch drive. And then they make a thinner version. When you get down to the point where you only got 2 heads and 1 disk, you don't need a full height drive, right? So they make a thin version. And then there's your 2.5 inch small form factor spec for all the SSDs and laptop drives that are still made. And that's all that's left.
Cool. That is interesting, and the implications that have, because our journey in NVMe over the last little bit, some of those ideas, they're bringing them back out, like the EDSFF, like all these U.3s, U.2s, they're in that 2.5. Like we said, we went down to the 7, but a lot of these NVMe drives are going back to the 15 mil.
15 mil, yeah.
And then like those rail ones that you just showed, I've seen some very cool NVMe drives, the EDSF form factor, and the same idea. They look a lot like our power supply modules.
Oh yes, like the ones
they slide in right in the PCI bus.
That's cool.
From what I understand is, because hard drives drove a lot of the form factor sizing.
Yeah. But
now that flash is stabilizing enough, and we've got NVMe, that they're like, well, we don't necessarily. If you ever open a 2.5-inch SSD, half of it's empty space.
Yeah. Yep.
Anyway, so cool.
Yeah, that's interesting.
That leads me into my next question, though. It was an idea you put in our brains, but I assume they're never coming back. But what killed the 2.5-inch hard drive? And is it coming back, or is it gonna just die out and live on your shelf like the other old ones?
Right. Okay. So there's a little more to this answer than might meet the eye.
Cool.
So the first thing I'll tell you is what eroded the hard drive, the 2.5-inch form factor for hard drives, and the answer is it was a combination of two commercial products that came out that changed the dynamics. Those two products were the iPad and the cloud.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah, the iPad and the cloud. What came about is what people in general, and this is not in a business sense, this is really more consumer driven. What people used to be doing on their laptops, they realized they could do on an iPad. Okay. And well, how do I get a movie on my iPad? Well, along comes the cloud. The internet gets a little faster. You don't need storage anymore. All you got to have is enough flash or enough memory on board that you can connect to your Wi-Fi and you can stream. So the cloud made content like crazy that's available over the air, and the iPad made it low cost, lightweight, and easy to cruise around. And what this did is it, commercially speaking, killed the laptop. So laptops are still made, of course, but they're not made in the volume that it, and also SSDs comes along, right? SSDs come along and get better and better in the same form factor, right? So many people start to say, I want an SSD in my laptop because it boots so much faster and it doesn't get fragmented the same way. I just feel like it's more reliable, and that's what I would prefer to have as an SSD. So you see the laptop industry get shook up and cut in half. You see it migrate towards SSD a little bit for customer satisfaction, that sort of thing, right? And what this does is it means that the 2.5-inch market, the available TAM, shrunk dramatically, all the way down to about 20% of its previous size. And the way the hard drive industry works commercially is the drives we sell today fund the R&D for tomorrow. And as soon as they stopped selling 2.5-inch drives, they stopped developing 2.5-inch drives. So
makes sense.
I had to give you some background before the final answer makes sense, but the final answer is there's no money for 2.5-inch drives.
I mean, I love hard drives as much as probably anybody in this podcast, but I will say that if you're using a hard drive for your OS boot drive in 2024, you're a masochist.
What do you? Why would you do that to yourself?
So, and that makes sense, right? Why the 2.5-inch form factor kind of had that silent, slow death.
Cool. Great answer.
Right.
Which then leads me into the next question. All right, let's flip it. The 3.5s, those aren't going anywhere. They're getting denser and denser. How far can the hard drive capacity go? We're at 24s now. I think we've got. Is that are we nearing the limit, or were you? Yeah. Where are we going?
No, we're not nearing the limit. This is a surprise. I've been following the development of this technology for a long, long time, but it is a bit of a surprise to me that it ever happened, to be honest with you. But HAMR is real, heat-assisted magnetic recording. And what that is doing is it's allowing the designers to shrink the track width even more, and also to flip the magnetic bits faster in a shorter linear run. And so the areal density that we can record on the disk is being raised by this technology. So there's also been a great deal of mechanical innovation of recent. So back in 2009, when I was still working within the design center, the maximum number of disks we had in a hard drive was 6.
Okay.
Today, they are making a hard drive that's the same physical size on the outside, same mounting standard. It has 11 disks in it and 22 heads. Jeez. That is incredible mechanical innovation.
Yeah.
And that is how they took the 2.0 terabyte per disk areal density, and they got you up to a 22 terabyte drive. It was through the mechanical innovation. So now that having been said, how far can we go? As you said, we're at 24 terabyte drives now. That's all CMR. It's all conventional magnetic recordings. There's no shingled magnetic recording involved with it. And there's also no NAND. It has been seen recently that some companies who want to make a little bit bigger drives have chosen to put some NAND on the board. And then that not only works as a cache if they need it to, but it can actually work as an emergency expander so that the drive can be listed as being a bigger drive than it actually is from a conventional magnetic recording point of view. But where we're at now is we're going to have HAMR innovate the areal density yet again. And again, I'm a little in shock myself, but they're talking about 4 terabytes per disk.
And
times
4 times 11. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
That's wild.
That's where we're going.
So to that point,
go ahead. I was just going to say, believe it or not, within 5 to 6 years, you're going to have a drive that is double a 24 terabyte.
Wow.
Yeah,
so
that's pretty wild.
We're
essentially still looking to double up.
What were you going to say?
What I was going to ask is, so you look at like Moore's Law, for example, and CPUs, and where we're at, we're shrinking so small to the point where eventually it's like they're going to run out of space, and it's like material science is going to have to kick in, where maybe silicon
there's not enough surface area.
Exactly. Maybe silicon isn't going to be the answer, and they're going to have to find a new type of, I guess, I don't know. What would the word
material.
Yeah, there you go. Material science. There you go. So is there work being done on that side on the hard drive space where once we reach that upper limit, are they doing work on the background of, hey, what's the next maybe? You
mean like what the platter's made out of?
Exactly. Yeah. And like being able to get more density per platter and things like that.
Yeah, actually the truth of the matter is that's exactly what HAMR is. It's an extreme innovation in material science.
Very cool.
Yeah. So it used to be, we would plate the media with a sputtered layer. So you could almost think of it, if you wanted to simplify it, it's actually very high tech, but you could think about it as spray painting an aluminum disc with a magnetic material.
Sure.
And then once it's hardened, then you kind of burnish it, right? Then you go in and you write servo reference tracks, right? And presto, you've got a disc. Well, in order for HAMR to work, they had to kind of leave the basics of that behind, and they had to start to regenerate the entire process of creating a disk at the atomic level. HAMR disks aren't made of aluminum, they're made of glass.
Cool.
Okay.
They're much thinner, they're much stiffer, and it's a much more complicated process to get the magnetics onto that glass disc, then to get it smooth enough, then to get the grain size of the magnetics small enough that now the laser can come in and do its work, and it can heat up very, very, very tiny little areas, store a bit, and then move on down the line and do it continuously. It's pretty impressive stuff.
Wild stuff. Yeah, when you explained it, I was just saying, when you explained it at our Creator Summit, like everyone was just kind of like jaw dropped, like how wild that is, HAMR technology. So I can't wait to hear more about it. I think you're going to talk more about it the next time you're here too as well, which is going to be exciting.
Yeah, I've got a couple of videos that I will give you guys links to so that some of your viewers can go out and watch what Seagate says about this nanotechnology.
What temperature is it that it heats it up to?
It's like 700 degrees Celsius.
Yeah, hot, and then immediately cools it down. Yeah, wild stuff.
Anyway, we won't spill any of the too good stuff. And the next time he's on, we'll dive into that and the whole factory processing of hard drive. Did a lot of the deep dive stuff. But like he said, we'll share the videos.
Yeah,
we'll all do our homework. We'll come primed.
Yeah.
But we'll switch gears again. It's funny hearing about. I loved hearing the past history of where hard drives came from, and you get to see all the different.
It's the Wild West.
The Wild West, right? I always joke a little bit that the Flash world, the NVMe world, is a bit of Wild West.
Yeah.
Like you wait a little bit, and it's a whole new architecture,
There's
new protocol, this, that, and everything.
Yeah.
As far as I've been working with hard drives, it's just fat 3.5-inch SATA hard drives, SAS hard drives.
Getting denser. That's it.
Where I'm going with all of this is I love hearing those stories of when they just tried stuff. Like there was one of the drives you talked about. They were using 2 arms.
Yep.
Dual actuator.
Yep.
Now they got away from that, but dual actuator is back now, and I do think this could be as deep as we wanted to go. But let's stay light right now. What are the pros and cons of dual actuator? Because I believe that dual actuator, people think it's just going to change the game and everything like that, but it's not a silver bullet that's just going to
fix everything or
your
change
software
everything.
needs to know how to handle it. So my question for you right now is, what are the pros and cons of dual actuator drives? Is it the future of SATA hard drives? Is that what's going to allow them to keep moving forward, or is it just kind of, we'll see?
Yeah, is it more performance per spindle, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so Seagate calls their dual actuator drive Mach 2, and they've got some, if you go to Seagate.com, there are places where you can watch videos and you can read a little bit about how that drive works and what it can do for you. Fundamentally, the idea is if you've got one set of heads that are actually moving to go get some data, and the second set of heads are in a different area and they can actually be reading or writing data while the first set is moving, and then you can switch. So now the other one's moving and the first one is reading and or writing. And what this does is it eliminates the latency of the mechanical drive. So pros and cons. There's a couple of key things to know. The first of which is the only way they can make that work, even with the way the technology on the interface is today, you have to use a dual port SAS controller. So these are only made in SAS, and they are made as a dual port slave device. Now you have to have a dual port master device. So it's a little bit expensive and a little more complex to get them in a system and working. It's not something that most users would be able to do in their home systems.
Gotcha.
The second, let's talk about the pros first. The pro, of course, is going to be related to speed. So there's 2 ways to get more speed out of a hard drive. The first way is RAID. When you use any kind of RAID, you got more spindles, and as you got more spindles, you got more going on and off heads, right? And so now we can use serial ATA, which is relatively slow, but we can talk to 5 drives at a time, and so we get an obvious multiplier just by using RAID. So basically, what this first idea of is for this dual actuator drive is, instead of having 2 drives and you try to RAID them in a way where you can access them both and actually get a power or a performance boost, here's the way to do it within the drive. I got another thing coming up, by the way, for another session you're gonna love. It's called regen.
Yeah.
Put that in your pipe. Yeah, put that in your hat, and we'll talk about regen a little bit later.
Awesome.
Okay. So the dual actuator drive is eliminating some of the latency through one moving while the other's not moving. Okay, so there are a couple of cons that are going to come along with this. One of which is each of those actuators has mass, and when one of them is accelerating from the outer diameter to the inner diameter, the other one is trying to stay on track. And then this one moves and that one's trying to stay on track, and vice versa. So good old Isaac Newton and his apple, taught us about equal and opposite reactions, right? So every time your dual actuator drive is doing a seek, the other actuator is going to suffer with that torque that is being created by the first actuator. So here's what that means to you as a user. Your chassis has to have properties that are different than a conventional chassis. It has to have a small amount of damping, and it also has to have very tight tolerances and some rigidity. We need to be able to hold that hard drive pretty firmly in space so that those two bodies of mass that are giving you 2 torques don't make the drive move in the chassis.
Yep.
Gotcha.
Interesting. That makes sense.
Okay, now what's the other con is this. The largest amount of power consumed by a drive is moving the heads. So that voice coil motor is the power hog in a hard drive. Now you got 2 of them. So not only is your power supply got to feed you more power, but all of that movement has some inefficiency electrically speaking, so you're going to produce more heat. So every hard drive has got a base casting and a circuit board. So you're bringing in 12 volts, you're using it to do work, and that's producing heat. That ends up getting absorbed by that base casting, and it's kind of hard to get that base casting to let go of the heat. So now if you got 2 actuators that are using 12 volts at the same time, your base casting is going to get warmer, right? You're going to have to up your fan speed, or you're going to have to improve your air dynamics through the chassis in order to keep a dual actuator drive cool.
Right. So do you see about double the wattage, or is it a little less from a standard traditional hard drive? Or
Oh, that is an excellent question.
I think it is. At least the early versions were. Maybe it's a little better now, probably.
Yeah, let me answer that for you factually. I have.
And
Where's
while he
my
does
Google?
look that up, so the
I'm going
dual
to see if I
actuators,
can share my screen.
you may be able to. What do you think, Mr. Producer?
Yeah, we got the permission to share.
All right. So we can share the screen.
Boop, boop, boop. Okay, let me know when you get it. You'll be looking at a. You'll be looking at a Seagate specification
Are
sheet.
indeed.
All right, so I'm going to
Hope you
run it
don't
to
got
the
any
top real
secret
quick.
tabs open.
Yeah, well, we're live.
Yeah.
Okay, so here at the top, you can see this is an Exos Enterprise data sheet, and you see here where it says Exos 2X14. That 2X
sir.
tells you we're talking about the dual actuator drive, okay?
Yep.
That's what it's called. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to run down here to the specifications, try to go slow so I don't make everybody nauseous. And I'm looking for the power consumption. Here we go.
Meantime,
So the
before
power
failure.
consumption that we care about is this one right here. This is your random read-write 4K size blocks, Q depth of 16.
Yep.
And in watts, this Mach 2 can consume 12.3 watts
Okay.
in random. And one line below it, you'll see that in sequential, it can actually access disks more quickly. So its maximum consumption right there is 13 watts.
That actually surprises me.
13.5.
I would have thought that random, because the actuator is moving across tracks much more often, that you would get higher power output versus a sequential where you may be reading one track. You know what I mean? But that's cool. That's interesting.
Yes. Yes. Every once in a while, you do get surprised by something that doesn't do exactly what you expected it to do. And
I love that.
Yeah, and I can explain that to you, but let's get the power number first. Okay, so now what I'm on is I'm on an Exos X24 sheet, and here's your max operating 4K
9.
right there, right?
9.8
And the
watts.
answer is 9.8 watts.
Yep.
So 9.8 to 13.5
Not quite double,
is
but
really
yep,
your
yep.
answer.
It's 60%.
Yeah,
something like that.
not double. Right.
Yep. Very interesting.
All right. And we're back.
Perfect. Thank you for that. So yeah, dual actuator drives, very interesting technology, but not a silver bullet. Like
Yeah, they're not
like we
gonna
said earlier,
use
new
SAS.
technology, it's going to replace everything. No,
Yeah.
it's got some implications. It solves a certain problem, but it's not going to solve every problem.
Yep. Exactly.
We are nearing the end of our time here, and we got to run soon. But I
Okay.
did want to squeeze one more question in before we
Yeah.
go. NVMe. We say the word NVMe, and you think flash.
Yep.
But NVMe is a protocol.
Just like SAS.
Much like
or sorry,
serial ATA, like you're saying,
IDE.
SATA.
Yep.
So this might sound stupid, but I don't think it is. Are we ever going to see an NVMe hard drive, as in a spinning disk that speaks the NVMe protocol?
Yeah, because we know we're not going to need the throughput that NVMe provides. But talking about these dual actuator drives, I mean, because they need SAS right now, could it make sense for like a dual actuator to make use of the NVMe protocol, something like that?
The answer is yes. I know for sure that Seagate is trying to produce an NVMe drive. I have the newest roadmap, and I can't share that with you directly. It is under NDA, but I can talk about a couple of key things. Okay, so NVMe considerations. The hard drive is targeted as a SATA replacement in this case.
Okay.
And they're saying NVMe features and commands that need to be implemented prior to deployment would include things like command duration limits and any special spin-up requirements. Yep. NVMe has very different protocols than SAS or SATA. Both SAS and SATA started out as hard drive protocols, and NVMe, of course, is not
it doesn't have
native
those.
To the hard. Yeah, that's right. So then Seagate has a few other questions that they're talking about, some field notes, if you will. Are deployment costs going to be
worth it?
In a range that people can actually utilize and compete with something like SATA that's already so high volume? Also, as I talk to some of my Seagate friends that are apps engineers and work in the labs and stuff, and I ask them about an NVMe hard drive, they say, well, yes, we're trying it. We're working with a couple of companies. We have some experiments going, and we're seeing if it could be real. But at this point in time, they really can't say yay or nay. It's an in-process experiment, TBD.
Cool. So figured out if the juice is worth the squeeze.
Exactly, because there's because there's another way to solve that, right? There is out of the small form factor, or Broadcom. This one's actually through Broadcom, but the UBM specification, the Universal Backplane Management, where they are able to get all three protocols, SATA, SAS, and NVMe, to just use a single backplane and then use as a single HBA card. Actually, that's what we've built our NVMe machine around. So even adopting that, you wouldn't necessarily, because you could make the argument, I'd love an NVMe hard drive because then I can just have an all NVMe capable machine. I just have to worry about one protocol. Or you have your HBA and backplane be able to speak anything.
Exactly.
So
just compatible with all.
Anyway, cool experiment. I wonder what we'll
I'd
see.
like to hear exactly what comes of it. Awesome.
Okay, with that, we are going to wrap up. Alan, thank you so much for your time. We are very eager to have you on again because we have some more questions. I want to talk deeper about HAMR. I really want you to tell everyone about the certification and factory processing of how they build hard drives and everything. Again,
the standards and tolerances and
go give your hard drive a hug, man. Those things work really, really hard, and you take for granted the scale at which they operate. So, with that. Alan, is there anything you want to share with the viewers about I don't know?
HDSTOR,
what's going on in your world? Any plugs you want to put in there? This is your opportunity.
Okay.
Trying to be a social media influencer right now, but if you are, maybe you can throw your Instagram or your Twitter.
So I haven't become an influencer yet, but I am kind of sticking my toe in the water. I do have a collection of white papers that talk a lot about hard drive technologies and how they work, and you can find those on our website. I can give you a link to that. You can put down in the comments. I also have a couple of links to key Seagate videos that I think are worth having your folks, your viewers might really enjoy those. Give you a little bit of a glimpse of what we're going to talk about later on HAMR and things like that. But overall, just much love. I appreciate you guys having me on. Hard drives are an older technology, but they're still innovating, and the value that they provide is, I think, the key thing, right? We can do things with NAND. We can get higher performance than hard drives, but you're always going to be somewhat limited if the cost stays non-competitive per terabyte, right?
Exactly.
So that's where we are, and the only word I would add to that is still. That's where we are still.
Yep.
And another thing we'll throw on that, you're right, cost, but the other thing is you could write to a hard drive forever, and they last. You can't write to flash forever. Not yet.
Yep.
That's true. That's true. Actually, I did build a calculator that helps our customers understand exactly, for their particular use case, how long will a particular piece of NAND actually last before it breaks. And a lot of people don't know that NAND does wear out and hard drives don't.
Exactly. And if you have a particularly write-intensive workload, maybe a lot quicker than you expect, especially if you're buying a consumer SSD. Some of those are hilariously bad.
I'm going to stop you there because that's going to kick us off for another good old discussion. So
yes, sir.
We will end this episode 2 of season 2 of What's Spinnin' with Alan. Thank you again so much for joining us.
Thank you,
and
sir.
Well, that's What's Spinnin'.